Welcome everyone to the conferences of this self-knowledge course. Today we will be studying conference number 47 of this cycle of 50 lectures, which make up Phase A, the first part of this course. All the lectures we have covered so far are available here in the video section. Once we complete the 50 conferences of this cycle, we will begin Phase B. These conferences address deeper topics related to our inner work and the initiatory path toward the self-realization of the being, or the awakening of 100% of our consciousness. Today's topic is very interesting. In this lecture, we are going to talk about witchcraft. We will try to understand its details, how it arises, and where witches receive their powers from. But above all, and most importantly, we will understand that each one of us carries the witch eye within our psychology, and that it is necessary to eliminate it in order to purify ourselves internally and free ourselves from the forces of the Black Lodge. Today, we will also speak about the differences between a white magician and a black magician. We generally define witchcraft as power. We recognize a witch as someone who has power over things, the power to manifest events, to move forces, and to see beyond the physical. But what is truly important is to know where that power comes from, since all power comes from a single source, from sex. The power of every human being resides in the creative energy of the Holy Spirit, which is sexual energy. The way we use that energy is what forms us into black magicians or white magicians. We must understand that in the sexual crossing between man and woman, which is what the cross truly symbolizes, the creative power of the human being is activated. Sexual union is a ritual of high magic, which is why it is known as sexual magic or tantrism. There are 3 types of sexual magic or tantrism: white, gray, and black. White tantrism is the sexual union of the phallus and the yoni without seminal ejaculation. This is the sexual practice that we have taught in this course, through which our precious creative sexual energy is not expelled from the body. Instead, in sexual union with a stable partner of the opposite sex, we activate that energy and make it ascend through the spine. In this way, we develop the kundalini within us, which is the serpent of our magical powers, and which, as it rises, grants us the powers and faculties of a white magician. The second type of tantrism is gray tantrism. This is sexual practice without a transcendental purpose. It is the kind of sexuality practiced by the vast majority of humanity, who are unaware of the power of their sexual energy and who, driven by their own lust, engage in sex only in search of animal pleasure. But since this sexual energy is creative, each time it is spilled through orgasm and ejaculation, it creates and develops more and more negative aspects within our psychology, also known as I's, selves, or egos. Moreover, by continuing in this way, the seminal envelope of the person becomes darker and darker with each act of fornication. Therefore, over time and across successive existences, the gray tantric ends up becoming a black magician, awakening in evil. The third type of tantrism is black tantrism. This is the practice of infrasex combined with magical rituals and seminal ejaculation. Through this practice, which all black magicians who seek to awaken in evil engage in, they begin to develop and awaken the kunda buffer organ, that tail with which all demons are represented. This tail can be seen in the astral plane. The kunda buffer is the descending fire toward the atomic hells of the humanoid. Through it, black magicians acquire powers and abilities. From this, we can clearly see the intimate relationship between sexual magic and witchcraft. Depending on the type of tantrism we practice, we will end up awakening either as white magicians or as black magicians. So we must understand that everyone who walks this path will eventually transform into either an angel or a demon, since they already know the power of the creative sexual energy of the Holy Spirit, and they already know that it contains the elixir of long life. Let us now look at some of the characteristics that differentiate white magicians from black magicians, so that we can not only recognize them externally, but also observe the details of the black magician, or the I of Witchcraft, within ourselves, in order to eliminate them through psychological death. Only by eliminating all the darkness within us can the white magician be born and develop in our interior, who is our intimate Christ. Among the main characteristics that differentiate the white magician from the black magician, we can observe that the white tantric never expels his creative sexual energy through orgasm and ejaculation. Instead, he values and transmutes his sexual energy with a stable partner in fidelity, chastity, and love. With white tantrism, the Kundalini rises. The Kundalini awakens the chakras in a positive way and opens the churches of wisdom that are found along the spinal column, developing their full potential and forming human beings as gods. White magicians awaken powers and faculties that are placed at the service of consciousness and of humanity. The black tantric, on the other hand, spills and reabsorbs sexual energy, and by pouring out the creative sexual energy, causes millions of solar atoms to leave the seminal system, and in exchange, millions of lunar atoms are reabsorbed, making the seminal envelope become darker and darker. So, through this practice, black magicians voluntarily awaken the powers of the inverted fire, or kunda buffer. In this way, the chakras in the lower abdomen awaken, granting them powers and faculties that they place at the service of the ego. Black magicians use these powers to subjugate others and to benefit from others, which is why they are always displaying and promoting their powers. They manipulate the emotions of others, they project fixed ideas into people's minds, and they manipulate the minds of others. They also manipulate through dolls and voodoo practices, and they dominate others. Through black tantrism, demons are formed. White magicians liberate their consciousness through psychological death. They know that the greater the amount of consciousness that is released, the greater the amount of consciousness that is awakened. Therefore, they strive more and more to sharpen the sense of self-observation, and they observe and eliminate increasingly subtle details of the ego from their psychology. In this way, they become aware of their own inner evilness and decide to eradicate it. Black magicians, on the other hand, are largely dedicated to feeding their defects. They do not practice psychological death. They defend and justify their negative ways of being. They feel good about themselves, feel righteous, and even describe themselves as saints. White magicians practice suprasex, and through it they create the existential bodies of the being that allow them to move at will in the higher dimensions of nature. The creation of these bodies grants them progress in the different initiations of the White Lodge. These initiations are related to the level of consciousness they acquire through their inner work. Black magicians, through black tantrism, gain degrees within the Black Lodge. They are ranked within the 13 degrees of the Anagarikas, and they achieve mastery, but only over the lower dimensions of nature. White magicians practice the 3 factors for the revolution of consciousness, because they understand that these are the only 3 objective works that can lead them to total liberation and to the awakening of 100% of their consciousness. Likewise, they try to teach these 3 factors to the other brothers and sisters of humanity, so that they too may achieve liberation and awakening. Black magicians, on the other hand, make great efforts to plunge humanity into the abyss. They seek to subjugate humanity through religious fanaticism or fanaticism of any other kind, as well as through vice and degeneration. Another important detail is that the white magician always seeks to preserve the purity of the knowledge, without mixing it, without removing anything from it, and without adding elements that are foreign to it. They teach knowledge with a strong emphasis on practice. They always respect the free will of others. They never tyrannize people or try to force them to accept the knowledge, and they give without expecting anything in return. In this way, they awaken love for humanity, which allows them to advance in their inner work until they are able to fully integrate their being and achieve sacred individuality. Thus, they incarnate and completely develop their intimate Christ and attain the intimate self-realization of the being. Black magicians, by contrast, never transmit pure knowledge. They deliberately distort it in order to manipulate, deceive, and confuse their followers. They seek to generate dependence and fanaticism in people so that they can benefit from them economically and energetically. Black magicians trade in esotericism, trade in wisdom, charge for teachings, teach pseudo-esotericism, and form pseudo-esoteric schools. They also tend to give titles, degrees, and initiations in the physical world. In this way, they confuse sincere aspirants and lead them astray. Black magicians advise others on what to do with their lives, interfere in the lives of others, threaten them, attack them, and harm others through works of black magic. They use their powers to tyrannize. They develop hatred toward other people. They provoke enmities through attacks. They carry out black psychic works to disturb and harm others. They falsify religions and deceive their religious followers. They seek followers, foster fanaticism, and deliver their followers to the abyss. And through all these actions, black magicians distance themselves from their inner being for eternities and fall into involution. Other characteristics that allow us to recognize a black magician are that they exploit the different branches of medicine. They trade in medicine, they trade in contraceptives, they perform castrations, they carry out abortions, and they conduct genetic crosses. They undress their patients, seduce their patients, or even rape them. They perform transplants and blood transfusions. They manage blood and semen banks. They carry out healings through negative entities and bind the consciousness of those who seek healing. They live off the misfortunes of others, since they charge for healing. They teach that ejaculation and orgasm are normal and beneficial, and they recommend masturbation. They do not respect divine law or the laws of nature. They commit crimes against nature and desecrate the temple of the Holy Spirit, which is the physical body. They do not practice chastity. They adulterate sex, practice infrasex, commit adultery with partners, and steal sexual energy. They are detached from their inner being. They awaken consciousness for evil. They form covens, practice witchcraft, perform black masses, invoke spirits and demons, and mediate works of black magic. They preach, but they do not apply. They develop only their intellect and their reasoning. They feel that they are good and just, and they call themselves saints. They pretend to be prophets and spread fear. They perform energy magnetization, thus manipulating the energy of others in a negative way. They practice hypnotism, preach contacts with extraterrestrials, and similar things. They compete and fight for fame, power, and prestige, and they constantly pursue pleasure. It is very important that we reflect on all of this and examine where we ourselves may be going wrong. When we are advancing on the inner path, it is normal to make mistakes, especially when there is a lack of work on psychological death. For this reason, we must observe ourselves in order to discover the witch eye within us and eliminate it. It is urgent that we study the black magician, so that we can recognize all of their behaviors within our own conduct and remove them from our psychology. Otherwise, sooner or later, we will fall into black magic. There are many details we can observe within our psychology that can alert us to the presence of the eye of witchcraft inside us, and to our tendency to develop it. For example, we can detect the witch eye when, having already received knowledge about the value of sexual energy and about the practices that allow us to make wise use of it, we nevertheless continue to fornicate that energy by voluntarily reaching orgasm and ejaculation. For this reason, we must make the greatest effort to achieve chastity. We can also observe this witch eye when we are very interested in easily developing powers and faculties without working on ourselves. We must keep in mind that there are many methods to awaken the latent powers and faculties within us, but if we do not work on the elimination of the ego, it will be the ego that uses those faculties for its own benefit, due to the lack of consciousness within us. We can likewise observe witchcraft in the part of ourselves that likes to advise others, that likes to interfere in the lives of others and tell them what they should do with their lives. We can also notice details of witchcraft in our interest in having someone else tell us the future, or tell us what to do with our lives, instead of seeking to connect with our own inner being. And also in the opposite tendency, the desire to make others dependent on us, or to generate admiration and fanaticism in them. We can recognize the desire to awaken in evil when, already knowing how psychological death is practiced, we consciously allow our psychological defects to manifest. We feed our defects at will, thus betraying our conscience and our inner being. We also nourish the darkness within us when we allow ourselves to feel hatred toward other people or arrogance toward our inner being. We must observe all of this, work on it, and eliminate it within ourselves in order to disintegrate the eye of witchcraft and detach ourselves from any witchcraft process. we must also understand that if we eliminate the details of witchcraft from our interior, especially those related to lust, witches and black magicians will no longer have any way to tempt or attack us, since what makes us weak before a black magician are our own psychological defects. We must become aware that there are many places that are truly dens of witchcraft, due to the practices carried out there and to the way people's energy is managed and manipulated in those environments, as well as because of the number of larvae, which are remnants of contaminated energy, that remain in such places. Among these places we find black magic consulting rooms, divination centers, cemeteries, pseudo-esoteric schools, churches, and centers or temples of worship and prayer. Red light districts or pleasure districts, brothels, motels, and theaters also fall into this category. Black magicians can fascinate many people because they are able to develop the capacity to move in the fourth dimension, or in jinn states. They can perform levitation, astral projection, and mental projection, although they can only move within the lunar region of those worlds. They also develop power in their word. They acquire telepathy, the ability to handle animals and elementals, magical hearing, clairvoyance, and premonitions. However, a black magician will never have more power than a white magician. He will never gain access to the higher dimensions of nature and will always remain enslaved by his own ego. What witches offer is health, money, love, powers, prestige, pleasure, seduction, revenge, hatred, domination over others, good luck, and similar things. All of these things, although they may appear attractive and desirable, are meant to keep us anchored to this third dimension and tied to materialism. They bind our consciousness to the physical world, to desires, ambitions, fears, and attachments, strengthening our ego and reinforcing our dependence on matter, sensation, and power. In this way, they distract us from what is truly essential and keep us trapped within the same mechanical cycle of suffering, illusion, and unconsciousness. However, when what we truly long for is self-knowledge, when we sincerely yearn to reunite with our real divine being or God within us, then these things must no longer fascinate us. We begin to understand that health, money, prestige, pleasure, and even psychic powers are fleeting and illusory when compared to the eternal riches of the spirit. Instead of seeking what binds us more strongly to this world, we work to free ourselves from witchcraft and from all forms of inner and outer manipulation. We dedicate ourselves to awakening our consciousness and to developing the white magician within us, so that we may gain access to the true treasures of the being, which await us in the higher worlds of consciousness: wisdom, inner peace, love for humanity, true happiness, sacred individuality, and union with our divine inner reality. This has been today's topic. I hope it has given you greater clarity about what witchcraft really is, and about the importance of beginning to work on our I of Witchcraft, so that it does not end up diverting us from the path toward the intimate self-realization of our being. Let us keep in mind that the main difference between a white magician and a black magician lies in the quality of their knowledge and in what they do with the knowledge they have received. As usual, I invite you to our next conference, in which we will once again talk about astral projection, a very important technique that can help us directly investigate all of these things we are learning here, together with our real inner being. In this topic, we will learn how to use the power of the word to achieve astral projection. For this reason, we will be reviewing the correct pronunciation of the mantras that we can use. Until the next conference.